What's the quickest you've ever seen a new coworker get fired? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. Law enforcement agency dispatcher trainee hired as a favor to their parent who was friends with the head of the agency. Guy who was already annoying, bragged and showed off that he was sexting an underage female, even showing it to sworn officers. Went quickly from employee to client. Story 2. When I worked in data entry, there was a tricycle on our office floor, just added as a relaxed bit of fun by the managers, who were all very chill people. One of the girls that got hired around the SE time as me would, instead of working, just ride the tricycle around the office all day, every day. When we all showed up in the morning, she wouldn't even log into her computer. She would just get right on the tricycle and ride around talking to people until she left. The day she got fired, she had to be escorted out of the building because she was screaming about, "You're targeting me unfairly, LOL." Story 3. Worked at a place where you couldn't be colorblind because you were reading schematics and identifying connectors of varying different colors. There was hundreds of tiny connectors in one array. Somehow, by the grace of God, this guy got hired. Either they forgot to implement the CB test, or he successfully guessed his way through it. He trains for a week and is put onto the line to build $20,000 cables for f***ing missiles. His very first connector he spent all day on, soldering and connecting and signing the paperwork and the steps, gave it to QC for inspection. It was one of the most f***up examples of a connector anyone had seen. Next day, guy admits he's colorblind and whether he can keep the job. He's let go because he cost the company $20,000. The connector was put on display in HR to drive home the importance of sticking to hiring procedures. Story 4. Hired my friend's sister as a hostess at our restaurant. She called off for her first shift 3 hours later, telling me that she was having a tough period. 30 minutes into her dinner shift, she started posting pics on Instagram of her being at a party in Canada. We live in New York. Fired her via Insta. Never even worked, then tried to claim unemployment, then had her father call me and try to threaten me into rehiring here. She was 34. Story 5. This guy shows up. The VP is gloating how great and brilliant he is. Blah, blah, blah. First day, doesn't come in until 10 a.m. Next day, same deal. Like working from 10:12, then leaving. Meanwhile, they flew him on a business trip leaving Wednesday and supposed to come back Friday. At the last second, he rebooked himself on a midnight flight. Meanwhile, on the Friday flight back at the last second, he was like, "Oh, have to take a different flight," and he just disappeared. What, mister? Mysterious didn't realize, as most of us used to work at his previous employer. Someone sent us a text, "Hey, I thought you hired blah blah blah. He's making copies right now." Turns out he was working 2 jobs. These are both science, tech companies with not that strict NDAs, but you can't work at a potential competitor simultaneously. He was fired from both jobs. Story 6. Orientation second day. He's to sit in a conference room and read through binders of important info. Our boss walks out and closes the door. It has a window with blinds open to see through. Going about our day, and the boss asks us why the conference door's locked and blinds closed. Nobody is sure, so they get security to open the door to see this guy kick back with the lights off asleep. He had closed the blinds and locked the door. Of course he was out there that day. Story 7. Small family company that in my lifetime, 34 years, went from 3 to 80 employees. One woman has been there 30 years and almost feels like a family member. Her daughter struggled with mental issues in high school, and in therapy it came out that she had been sexually abused as a kid by an older kid. Others corroborated the story. Because it was never an official charge, that's the type of thing that doesn't show up on a background check. A few years pass, her daughter goes to college, meets a great guy, gets engaged, her life is going well. And I hired a new warehouse worker. I'm doing his onboarding and bringing him to the office for introductions. The mom's face drops. She pulls me aside. I had hired the abuser. I told him an unforeseen conflict had come up and I wouldn't contest unemployment. Those are the types of situations they don't really prepare you for in management. Story 8. I once saw a new coworker get fired on their first day during lunch. They loudly bragged about how they lied on their resume to get the job. Unfortunately, they didn't realize the boss was sitting right behind them. By the time we got back to the office, their desk was already cleared out. They were gone before we even finished our afternoon coffee. It is just insane how stupid some people are. Story 9. We hired an IT guy who was just well that weird. Didn't seem to do much but was always out and about talking to people. Whatever, not my department. Then I heard he got fired. He was asked to help the CEO with his computer. The guy walked into the executive offices acting weird and like he knew everyone, rude and inappropriate to the secretaries. Then walked into the CEO's office and took one look at his computer and said, "No wonder it's not working, Macs are shit." Spent 10 minutes ripping into the CEO about his poor choice of computer and complaining about his job, then got asked to leave. Never saw him again after that. Story 10. I worked on an IT help desk. It was me and another guy. He quit because there was no room for growth. They hired this guy who supposedly had 25 years of experience in it. I was tasked with training this guy. He was an older guy and was so deaf he couldn't hear the phone ringing. I had to show him how to do the same things over and over again, like how to install a printer. I even made training documentation, but instead of reading that, he would just ask me to show him. He was a high school football coach on the side, and that's all he talked about. After a week, I went to the boss and said, "This guy is useless to me." The boss sat with him for 2 hours at his desk, and he was fired the next day. I felt bad the guy lost his job, but he was not absorbing any info and I was doing 2 jobs. Story 11. Back in the mid-1990s, I had hired a guy for senior Unix systems administration role. It was made quite clear in the posted job description, the interview process, and on his first day that this role would be required to be on call a few nights per month, on a rotating basis with the other Unix admins. The salary reflected that as well. This was a 6-figure position. He was issued a company laptop and a cell phone for his on-call work that could be done from home. As part of the onboarding process, our Unix lead admin wanted this guy to shadow him on his on-call evening so that he could see how processes differed in the off hours. It was his second day on the job. That evening, I happened to be working a bit late, and the help desk calls me saying they've got an issue that needs to be escalated to the Unix team and asking if they've got the right number for the new guy because it's just ringing and going to a default voicemail mailbox. I tell them to call the lead admin to get him working on the issue and that I'll contact the new guy myself. I call, same thing, voicemail, multiple times. I fish out his employment docs that are all still sitting on my desk and find his home phone number. I call and get about 3 words out of my mouth when he responds, "Why the f*** are you calling me at home?" and hangs up. A bit in disbelief, I look back at the paperwork and verify, yes, this is his phone number, and try again, thinking maybe he'd mistaken me for someone else. I receive a similar bit of vitriol and a hang-up. I contact the lead admin and inform him he won't be having the new guy join him that night or any other. We immediately killed all of his system access and his door card, and HR was waiting for him at the reception area first thing in the morning. Story 12. Day 4 of orientation. I got hired onto a trucking company after CDL school. They had 5 days of orientation and it took place at their headquarters that was several states away. You could either have them fly you there, or you could drive yourself and they would cover your expenses. Also, the company would put you up at a hotel, pay your food costs, and provide transportation to the headquarters. I didn't even think it was possible to get fired at orientation. All you have to do is show up and pretend to pay attention. This one guy drove himself there. I think he lived about 800 miles away. On the first day of orientation, he tells anyone who'll listen that he forgot to keep his receipts and he better get reimbursed. I think I'd rather eat the cost than announce to everyone how stupid I am. On the second day, he slept in and missed the shuttle and ended up driving himself. On the third day, he missed the shuttle yet again and was over an hour late. Worse than that, he fell asleep during orientation. I knew he was done for and the instructor angrily woke him up and asked for his full name. On day 4, he showed up on time, but his fate was sealed. When I was at the hotel later that night having a cigarette, I saw him loading his stuff into his car. I asked him what happened and, got canned. I can't say I blame them. I'll be the first to admit that trucking isn't the hardest job, but being on time, paying attention, and getting adequate rest are very big keys to success. They probably made the right move. I felt bad for the guy though. He essentially drove 800 miles to get fired and then drove 800 miles back. That had to feel like a long trip. Story 13. I interviewed a young woman, cute, but with giant bolt-on boobs and a skin-tight sweater. Whatever, it wasn't inappropriate, so we began the interview. Note, I'm a dude. Second question, tell me about a time you had a difficulty with a coworker. What caused the difficulty and how did you resolve it? Well, I used to sleep with my boss. It was kind of an open secret, and I definitely got treated better by my boss because of it, which obviously I was okay with. Some of my coworkers were jealous because of it. I just didn't let it get to me because I liked the perks I got. So that's how I resolved it. Third question. Tell me about a time you faced a problem on the job you weren't sure how to solve. Well, like I said, I slept with my manager, so I pretty much went to him anytime I had a problem, and he was always happy to help me. So I think that was a pretty successful strategy for me. Literally 80% of her answers included a reference to her sleeping with the boss and being happy to do it. At the end of the interview, I gave her the standard. Thank you for coming in. We'll let you know when she reached out, put her hands on mine, looked me deep in the eyes and said, "This has been such a wonderful experience. I feel like I could just talk with you all afternoon and evening. I feel like we have a really great connection, and I really, really like you. I hope you hire me. You won't regret it. Does being fired before you were ever hired count?" Story 14. I've got a good one. My friend was a creative who moved to Louisiana for a year-long gig that had ended, and he needed a job. He got hired by a company that was a couple hours away that would cover his room and board on site. Kinda weird, but sure, great. So he broke his lease and packed up to move. His first day, his boss welcomed him in, showed him around, took him to his new office, and said he'd let him get settled. Lunch is available in the cafeteria at 11. He went to the cafeteria and explained to the cook that he had a life-threatening fish allergy and couldn't eat anything if it had been cooked on the same grill as fish. The cook wasn't very reassuring, so he ate something safe and went back to his desk. 30 minutes later, his boss came in and said it wasn't working out. My friend started crying. He didn't understand what he'd done wrong, because he hasn't done anything wrong. Anyway, that was around 2005. A couple years later, he tells me the name of the company. It was the Church of Scientology. Turns out he dodged a huge bullet. Story 15. Had a guy quit on his first day. He was hired for the dev team, and his first day happened to coincide with an all-company meeting. He shows up and at the meeting is eyeing one of the on-site techs. This tech is 5 feet nothing, an all-around great guy, and the new guy was close to 5 feet 10 inches, but he was just staring nervously at him. After the meeting, the new employee asks his supervisor questions about the on-site tech, like how long he'd been there, what his job was, etc. He left for lunch and then never returned. Turns out that this new guy was the man that the on-site tech's wife cheated with and broke up their marriage like a decade before. Apparently, the on-site tech found him at a bar shortly after finding out and unleashed his 5 feet fury on him, beating the tar out of him. The on-site tech is remarried and has kids now and says he doesn't care anymore, but that Munchkin beating he laid down had some lasting psychological effects on the new guy, I guess. Alright folks, that's a wrap. If you like this, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also share your those in the comment below.